yourself as opposed to time that you constantly feel you need to give to others. So that could be one way of conceptualizing it. Time you give versus time you keep. And how you fill the time you keep is up to you.
Wonderful thoughts. Someone says here, because the value of money has been put above all else, that's why. 5 away from 5 o'clock. Bron says, Wallace, just quite a bit of around the benefit changes. Apart from the small amount one can earn from having one's benefit reduced, the way it was applied was inequitable. I got a short part-time job for a few weeks and lost about $40 a week. A friend got some contract work and was paid $2,000 for a couple of months' work. He lost his benefit only for the week that he was paid. And don't get me started about the dental benefits. So there's a lot more nuanced than many might think. Love the chat, says Bron. And on a final Friday afternoon note, would an app that gives you points for doing housework motivate you? Well, there is such a thing, and it's called the labour of love. It was the idea of a couple who were both busy with their careers and family duties, and the allocation of household tasks led to arguments. Now, the app is basically a to-do list that has points attached to each task. You assign each task so many points, and when you reach the goal of the number of points you're aiming for, you get a reward. So it's also designed to make men appreciate the unsung work that the female partners do. So you get a reward with this app, the points line up. Joe McCarroll, would this app work in your household?
The very idea of this app just depresses me, Wallace. I mean, I absolutely, there's the so-called mental load where you see the jobs that need to be done, you set yourself up to do those jobs, you make sure the food is there to cook the meal that you planned, all of the steps you need to take for things to happen. I mean, that's very, very real. But this over-engineered solution where you have an app where you have to put points against it. And I think even in this story, it says, to relieve this load on women. And I'm like, I bet you it will be women who are entering all the information into the app. Is it not possible for men just to wash the towels when they see that they are dirty? I mean, why?
How hard is that?
Why do we need this hand-holding in order to just keep the household running?
No, but it's an app. It's a solution. This is a solution, Raj.
I see we have an over-engineered technological solution, and that may be more palatable to you, Wallace.
It's a great solution.
Why is it necessary?
Raj, do you agree with me?
Well, I can agree to be the guinea pig and try this in our home and report back on Twitter. But if there is time, one thing I will say, there was this, by coincidence, I happened to be watching a TED Talk yesterday, and a psychologist called Tali Sharot spoke about how best to offer incentives to people to break certain habits and make new ones. And very quickly, she narrated an anecdote that's kind of relevant or similar, where in a hospital, where hospital employees know that, sanitizing your hands are really important, and they knew that there was a camera watching them every time they made contact with a patient, whether they'd washed their hands before or after. And apparently, far better results than with a camera that they knew about. They obtained far better results when there was this screen on which they could see how well their shift did as opposed to other people on other shifts.
There you go.
So,
hey,
I've been washing the towels for ages. No one's given me any points for it.
You have both been a wonderful Friday afternoon listen. Raj Chakraborty and Joe McCarroll, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, producer Julie Moffat. And it's Checkpoint coming up.
Ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, an expert advisory group recommends a radical change to our welfare system, including a big bump to benefits and ditching most sanction. But the government's immediately vetoed one of its core recommendations. So can we actually afford transformational change? More details on what might have delayed the Pike River re-entry as families gathered at the mine and the concrete seal that should have been broken today. People too traumatised by the Christchurch mosque attacks to work want to know why victim supporters holding back millions of dollars in donations. And right now, a monster find of swamp Cody is being loaded onto a truck in Auckland. You can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. Beneficiary advocates say the government isn't moving fast enough on reforms to the welfare system. The 200-page report of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group has been released this afternoon, and it contains 42 recommendations for changes to social security. But the Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni has announced just 3 changes, 2 of which will come into effect on April the 1st next year. One of those changes is the long-promised removal of the sanction on sole mothers who don't name the father of their children. Another change is to raise abatement thresholds so beneficiaries who work can earn more before their benefit is docked. But Ricardo Mendes March from Auckland Action Against Poverty says Labour committed to repealing the sole parent sanction during the 2017 election campaign, and it should make changes urgently.
For us to have to wait most of the term for a decision and now pretty much until the end of the term for it to come into place is disappointing. We think the government is not acting with enough urgency on poverty.
Ricardo Mendes March. A breakage in a vital piece of equipment is being blamed for the delay in the much-awaited re-entry of the Pike River mine. The re-entry to search for clues as to why the mine exploded, killing 29 miners, had to be called off at the 11th hour after heightened and potentially dangerous levels of oxygen were detected. The Pike River Recovery Agency's Dingy Pentinson says a split in a tube bundling system or pipe is the most likely cause of the oxygen levels reading. The pipe is used to monitor conditions in the mine, and it's thought the breakage was sucking oxygen into the entry tunnel. He says further testing is underway with a replacement pipe. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and her long-term partner Clark Gayford are getting married. A spokesperson has confirmed the couple were engaged over the Easter break. Here's political reporter Yvette McCullough.
Jacinda Ardern and Clark Gayford first met at an awards event in 2012. Mr Gayford is a television personality who is currently presenting a fishing documentary show. Last year, Ms Ardern gave birth to their first child, Neve Te Aroha Ardern Gayford. A spokesperson for Ms Ardern wouldn't confirm any details other than that the pair got engaged in Mayhew over the Easter holidays. In an interview with the BBC last year, Ms Ardern was asked whether she could imagine proposing to Mr Gayford, and her response was that she wanted him to go through the pain and torture of having to agonise about that question himself. National leader Simon Bridges has tweeted that he and his wife Natalie extend their congratulations to the PM and Clark on their engagement. From Parliament, Yvette McCullough.
The Prime Minister has had to rein in 2 of her ministers for getting personal about Paula Bennett's Māori heritage. A slanging match erupted this week when senior Māori members of the coalition government went on the attack against the National Party deputy leader and her whakapapa. A spokesperson for Jacinda Ardern says while she understands her MP's desire to hold all members to account on the work they do for their local communities, she expects that it will not become personal. Mrs Bennett described the comments from Willie Jackson and Peony Henare as racist and out of sync with Ms Ardern's attempts to make Parliament a kinder place.
It's not me that needs the apology. As I say, it's the thousands like me out there that right now will be wondering what Labour actually stands for when it comes to Māori.
Paula Bennett. A man says his sister, who is under the care of the Canterbury District Health Board's Mental Health Services, was found in such an emaciated condition that he thinks that she was days away from death. The 61-year-old woman, who RNZ has agreed not to name, lives with a brother in Christchurch. Another brother, Jeff Aitken, says his sister was found weighing 44 kilograms in soiled clothes and with an infected burn on her leg. He says the Canterbury District Health Board was supposed to be doing regular checks on his sister.
I personally feel if she hadn't been got by the caregiver in that time, when the caregiver finally caught her, I would say that probably within a couple of days, she may not have made it.
Jeff Aitken says the family is yet to get an update from the DHB about what has happened. More than 170 schoolmates of a whangarei girl who died of meningitis have been vaccinated today after the community raised the funds to protect them. Alexis Albert from Hikurangi Primary School had just turned 7 when she was fatally infected last July with the new W strain of meningococcal disease. Health authorities have been offering free vaccinations for those most at risk, the under 5s and teenagers. But a Hikurangi parent, Alicia Howie, said that left low low-income families like hers in an awful position. Her preschool son was protected and her 6-year-old daughter was not.
It was difficult taking one child in and not being able to do the other. For us it was really, we couldn't afford to do the second vaccination, which is really pulls at your heartstrings, thinking, one can but one can't. So yeah, that was really hard.
Alicia Howie, the Hikurangi community raised $6,000 for the meningococcal vaccine, and Whangare Rotary raised the remaining $11,800. It's 5:05. The Warriors believe their patience in replacing Sean Johnson has paid off after securing Cody Nikorima on a 3-season National Rugby League deal, which begins immediately. The 25-year-old Kiwis halfback leaves the Broncos after 7 seasons and is poised to make his Warrior debut next week. The Warriors assistant coach Tony Iro believes that Nikorima will slot in seamlessly.
Well, he's a Kiwi for a start, so he has a good relationship with, our current Kiwi players. So I think, the fit's going to be pretty natural for him.
Tony Iro. Coach Mark Rudin and the Phoenix aren't shying away from the fact tonight's A-League football elimination playoff against defending champions Melbourne Victory could be their last time together. The Phoenix must win in Melbourne tonight to advance to the semi-finals.
I'm treating it like it's the last game, and I want them to play like it's their last ever game. We don't look further away, and I want them to give everything of themselves. So that's exactly the mentality that we're having. There's a lot of work being put into this season. There are certain behaviours and habits that need to be there because it's been there all season.
The match kicks off at 9:50 tonight. The Crusaders coach Scott Robertson says the Sharks are one of the best finishing sides in Super Rugby, and he's warning his team not to get complacent tonight in Christchurch. The hosts are looking to extend their advantage at the top of the standings, but Robertson is wary of a Sharks side who lead the South African Conference.
They're a very impressive team against the Waratahs. It just shows how physical they can be when they have the ball and hold the ball. They can finish. They've got some great finishes.
Scott Robertson. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Country Life meets Ray Maservi, who's been milking goats for all they are worth. Tom Scott's Avondale Bowling Club is this week's Friday Night Live act, and Jonathan Faulkner introduces us to the element technetium. Sounds like something you'd find on a stereo. Turns out most of the stuff on Earth is human-made, so that'll go nicely with a sonic tonic dedicated to things synthetic. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, cloudy periods with the odd light shower. Auckland to Waitomo and the central high country, including Bay of Plenty, also Whanganui. Fine apart from areas of fog or low cloud morning and night. For Gisborne through to Wairirapa, cloud spreading north today, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Taranaki, also Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with the odd light shower. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine apart from isolated showers about the Sounds tomorrow. For Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from low cloud about the coast tonight and tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, fine spells today, becoming cloudy tomorrow with showers in Westland spreading to Bulla after dark. Fiordland, cloud increasing today with late drizzle, rain tomorrow, heavy from tomorrow afternoon. Southland, fine today, high cloud increasing tomorrow with scattered rain from the evening. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few light showers today. It's 5:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The welfare system is no longer fit for purpose and needs a fundamental change. That's the verdict of the expert advisory panel that was tasked with scrutinising it. Its 200-page report contains 42 recommendations for reform. They include scrapping most sanctions, increasing benefits by up to 47%, and increasing the amount of money beneficiaries can earn before their benefits are docked. The list of recommendations would cost an extra $5.2 billion a year, and they want the changes brought in within 2 years. Our social issues reporter Sarah Robson has the details.
The expert advisory group says too many people are leading desperate lives with seriously inadequate incomes, and that's causing toxic levels of stress. Its chair, the former Children's Commissioner Cindy Kero, says that's not healthy or sustainable and change is needed.
That feels pretty urgent for the people who are there, but at the same time, you have to make decisions and priorities, and if we can look for ways to actually improve what their experience is and that they get proper entitlements, then in fact that's an improvement, and I'm keen to see that happen.
The Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, says the government can't implement all of the group's recommendations at once, but she's taking some immediate steps in the upcoming budget. The government will finally fulfil its pledge to scrap the sanction on solo mums who don't name the father of their children, which will come into effect on April the 1st next year. It will also allow beneficiaries who work to earn more before their pay is docked. Ms Sepuloni says the government needs time to work through changes to other aspects of the system.
What the report also points out, despite saying that there are areas that are urgent and need to be addressed immediately, is that there are complexities in the system. And there are interactions that occur across the welfare system that need to be taken into consideration. So we have to do it carefully to make sure that we get it right.
The overhaul of the welfare system was promised as part of Labour's confidence and supply deal with the Green Party. Its co-leader, Marama Davidson, says the government is on the right track, but she acknowledges that struggling families have been waiting a long time for change.
I know that for families it's far too late for too many families. I know that there are children who have missed out on things, on living with dignity, for actually over 30 years of successive governments not having a good enough system. I know this is urgent. Greens are clear this is urgent. We want to work with our partners to fix this.
Ricardo Menendez March from Auckland Action Against Poverty says the government should urgently remove the sanctions on solo mothers, something Labour committed to doing during the 2017 election campaign.
For us to have to wait most of the term for a decision and now pretty much until the end of the term for it to come into place is disappointing. We think the government is not acting with enough urgency on poverty.
Carmel Sepuloni has confirmed that the repeal of the sanction will not be retrospective and people will not be back paid. Meanwhile, the government has held off implementing the expert advisory group's recommendation to immediately increase benefit levels by up to 47%. Ricardo Menendez March says that would be a simple way to ease the burden on many struggling families.
Increasing the core benefit levels and ending all sanctions is one of the things they could have done this wellbeing budget to make a real, tangible effect into people's well-beings. So far, we're getting more rhetoric than action.
National Social Development spokesperson Louise Upston says the government has under-delivered.
Labour have talked up a big game in terms of welfare reform, and to have picked up only two of the recommendations is quite frankly pathetic.
Carmel Sepuloni hasn't put a time frame on when announcements will be made about the next phase of welfare reforms. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Former Business New Zealand boss Phil O'Reilly was one of 11 members on the Welfare Expert Advisory Group. He describes the changes recommended in the report as transformational.
The idea is that the social welfare system is really not fit for purpose for today. It probably hasn't been fit for purpose for many years. So what we're recommending is a really radical change away from a focus on sanctions and rules, along a focus of shared expectations, mutual expectations, where yes, there are expectations on you as a player, as a person who is getting welfare, but there's also expectations on the state to treat you fairly and to make sure that you get access to the right benefits and so on. So much more to that kind of more dignified response to welfare rather than what we've got into in the past, which is much more rules-based, much more thinking of welfare recipients rather in a dehumanised sort of capacity, really.
Okay, so if you want transformational change and you want to move to a dignified system, what have we currently got? Because you sat through people telling you their stories. What did they tell you?
The system's really become quite dehumanising. It's become quite difficult to be treated fairly and equitably and with dignity in the system. And I say that as one who hadn't dealt with the system much. I mean, I walked in as a New Zealander into many of those meetings and interviews around the country with those engaged in the system, those who are clients of the system. And I just walked in with an open mind, willing to let the evidence take me where it would. And what I found was some really sad stories, and I found some stories that were quite, I think for any New Zealander to listen to them, they would be challenged by them, because I think most New Zealanders would think that, we pay an awful lot of money for our welfare system and we would expect that it would treat people fairly and well, and that they would get back to work if they could. And in reality, it doesn't do a very good job of any of those things, hence the kind of radical reform that we're talking about in the report.
Okay, so What is the cost of transformational change and a dignified system? How much will that cost us?
Well, it's a big number. We recommended $5 billion worth of extra spending per year. That's a big number, and unsurprisingly, the government's not making much of a comment about that today. I mean, I wouldn't expect them to if I was them either. But when you look at that $5 billion spend, have a look at how much we're currently wasting because the system simply doesn't do the job it needs to do. Just tonight, for example, there will be, these are public figures, 880 people living in motels in the Hawke's Bay. 440 of those will be children. Now that's a huge cost that's unheralded. We don't know what that cost is currently. We don't talk about that. That's the kind of cost we could potentially save. The cost of people turning up to hospitals that are sick who are living in substandard housing, the cost of theft, the cost of drug addiction because we're simply not looking after these people and they turn themselves to desperate ways. Now that's not being a bleeding heart liberal. That's the evidence. That's what the data tells us. And so when we look at that big headline number, $5 billion, it's a lot of money. Even I swallowed when I saw that figure. That's a big number. But when you look at if you think about that as an investment over time in dragging down some of those other costs, I think you'd find it probably would be a good investment, more particularly if you can get people into good work, well-paying work, and get them paying some taxes rather than being, if you like, some sort of burden on the taxpayer.
But you understand the politics, that you have to bring people along with you or you won't be in government next time round. So, I mean, how do you sell that? How do you sell that to voters? Well,
it's not that easy, but I'd hope that people like me saying it matters, and I hope that the breadth of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, 11 people from pretty different sort of backgrounds all saying this, I hope also that the work that's gone into the report, its scale, its heft, the research that's gone into it will help persuade people. But above all, I really hope that politicians don't politicise it. What's really happened in the welfare system over the last 20 or 30 years, I think, is that it's had some of the worst politics around it I could have seen. You know, what'll happen is someone will do something bad, they'll commit a crime or something will happen, and all of a sudden there's this big rule that for all welfare recipients, just because that one person or two people did something bad, that's the result of petty politics being played in the system. I think it's important that this report is not owned by the politicians, it's owned by New Zealanders, and I hope that they take it away and have a look at it and think about it so that we don't return to the slogans of politicians of either side on the political divide. That we actually have a decent debate in New Zealand about how we want to treat those who are not well off and who are vulnerable, particularly those who are vulnerable through no fault of their own, through things like a mental illness.
I know you say you don't want it to go that way, but come on, you've got three parties in a government, right, who have to come to an agreement on it. One of them has got this overhaul in their confidence and supply agreement. Then you've got another major party, New Zealand First with Winston Peters. Really?
Yeah, well, when you saw Tracy Martin today at the launch of the thing, New Zealand First Minister, of course, supporting some changes that would otherwise have been seen to be pretty radical. A few years ago, the change which penalises a woman for not naming the father of the child. So there is some change going on, but I think this is actually long run change. And my sense is that it's over to the politicians now to put aside that political piece and hopefully explain what they're trying to do. Hopefully we've given them some tools to do that. But to your point, I could be as cynical as anyone and say this is never going to happen. If that's the case, that means those people who are currently worse off than we might expect they are, as we hope they would be as New Zealanders on welfare, their lot won't get any better, and I think that'll be a terrible outcome.
Well, here's the thing though. So in your report, you make over more than 40 recommendations. Yep. I think there was 4 that you basically said were critical and they should be done with urgency. No sooner has the report been released and one of the recommendations you said should come in with urgency was to raise benefits by up to 47%. Report comes out, followed by a press release from Labor saying, no, not going to do that immediately.
Well, Lisa, you need to talk to the Minister about that, of course.
How do you feel about that, though? How do you feel about the fact that you just got out of the starting gate and they said, computer says no?
What the Minister announced today was a change in the abatement threshold, which does actually mean that people can earn some more money before the sort of the chopping block starts to enter their income. So that's kind of helpful move forward. But I do have some sympathy for them. They They only got this report in February. It's now May. They were donkey deep in a budget round during that time. Let's see what they say in the budget. But the minister did say that she was going to move forward on these matters in the coming period. And so I think all of us, including you and me, have got to hold her and her colleagues to account for that. So the fact they didn't announce anything today, pretty challenging. That's a $5 billion spend. The fact that she announced movement forward, that's good. Let's see what she says, and let's see over what time frame she says it.
But she vetoed possibly your biggest recommendation.
For now. She vetoed it in this year's budget. She said they weren't going to move forward in this year's budget. Now there's going to be a bunch of activist groups and a bunch of people who were no doubt around the Welfare Expert Advisory Group who will be most disappointed about that. I'm sure they'll be making public statements about that as we speak. My view, as one who's done many of these things over the years across a broad range of issues in New Zealand, I think it's important that we bring politicians on board and that we're patient with their political processes, not to say you've just got to do it in 60 days, spend billions. I don't think that's reasonable. The other thing to note is that the social welfare system is an incredibly complex beast. That was another thing that really stood out for me as I studied it. If you change one bit, you impact other bits of the system. And so they do need to be cautious about doing that. I'm not trying to defend them. I'm trying to make sure that everybody understands the politics of this. But it is down to them. I said to the minister today, it's all yours now, Minister. You've got to justify your decisions now. We've given you the report. We'll stay true to the report. You need to justify the politics around the report. So good luck to her for doing that.
Former Business NZ boss Phil O'Reilly, who was one of the 11 members on the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, and we'll hear from the Minister Carmel Sepuloni later in the programme. It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about the suggested welfare reforms. Can we afford $5.2 billion a year? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. People too traumatised by the Christchurch mosque attacks to work want to know why victim support is holding on to millions of dollars donated to Christchurch's Muslim community. They say they can't pay their bills and the financial pressure is making it harder for them to recover. It comes as the death toll from the attacks rose to 51, with a Turkish citizen who was shot in the chest dying in Christchurch Hospital. And as the community struggles to deal with the news, one group says it's also worried about the survivors and that a lack of support could lead to more hurt. Veronica Schmidt reports.
I'm way behind my bills, phone bills, electricity bills, my rent is overdue. Luckily, I have a friend who gives me food and stuff. That's how I survive. But at the end of the day, I'm living like a beggar's life because of this.
Farhan Fahiz was at the Linwood Mosque on the 15th of March when the gunman, who had killed more than 40 people at the nearby Al Noor Mosque, arrived and opened fire, killing 7 more. Mr Fahiz has post-traumatic stress disorder and struggles to explain what he saw that day.
I've never experienced anything like that before in my life. I feel that it was just one of those things, obviously that happened unexpectedly, but just sorry, I don't have the words.
Farhan Fahiz is under the care of a GP, psychiatrist and counsellor and is too unwell to work at either of his jobs. He's desperate to recover and get back to work, but the financial pressure is making him so stressed, he's struggling to make progress.
I just wish to have a normal life, but at the end of the day, with no support, it just becomes really difficult.
In the days after the Christchurch attacks, New Zealanders placed flowers at mosques, posted messages of support on social media and donated huge amounts of money to those who had lost so much. Victim support raised $10.5 million. The Christchurch Foundation, more than $6 million, and 7 predominantly Islamic groups raised about $3 million. Speaking on RNZ at the time, Victim Support's Chief Executive Kevin So promised this.
The money is going to be used for the purposes of victims and the community. Things like food, rent, accommodation, even driver's licence and driving lessons.
So why are traumatised people like Farhan Fahiz being left struggling to make ends meet?
Kia ora, you've called Victim Support. Our calls may be recorded for training and coaching purposes.
Victim Support is best placed to answer that question. As well as the money it raised itself, RNZ understands responsibility for the $3 million raised by the Islamic groups has also been given to Victim Support. But Victim Support has stopped giving interviews and has employed a PR company to represent it. Following multiple interview requests and questions from RNZ, this week the organisation released its first statement since the 10th of April. In the written statement, the organisation say this.
2 rounds of financial support have already been given to 47 families of those who were killed and 80 people who were hospitalised. In addition to the payments, grants have also been given to help cover immediate expenses resulting from the incident, including funeral expenses, travel, accommodation and other discretionary costs. Each is assessed on a case-by-case basis. These are exceptional times, and finding all those who need our help is an extremely complex process, which takes time.
But Yama Nabi has immediate needs. He arrived at the Al Noor Mosque in the immediate aftermath of the shooting and also saw his father's death on the live stream filmed by the accused gunman. Like Farhan Fahiz, he's received only a small amount of money from Victim Support soon after the attacks and has been forced to return to work as a butcher in order to support his family.
Who's going to pay the mortgage? Who's going to pay, for the food, for the kids, for the family?
He says he's struggling to deal with the animal blood and carcasses after what he saw that day.
That's what I wanted, just to have time off work, because I work in the meat works, working with the cattle and the slaughter area. So I didn't expect to see a human body on the street and going back and going, butchered.
Bianca Lindstrom and Zian Basharati set up the Christchurch Victims Organising Committee after the attacks, and they've been delivering food and clothes and giving advice to families in Christchurch in the 7 weeks since.
They are traumatised, they can't go to work, but they're not getting paid. If you're stressed out and you don't have the support or the money to be able to take that time out, you're going to feel isolated, and then, it's just downhill from there.
Bianca Lindstrom is concerned that could end tragically.
We are worried that we're going to see a lot of suicides just in the community. There's a lot of people that aren't coping and they're not getting the help that they need.
Ms Lindstrom wants to know where Victim Support is.
We're getting phone calls saying, oh, hi, Victim Support's supposed to call you. Really? Because we don't have any funding or resources or staff, so we're out working through all hours of the night and weekends. Where is Victim Support? What are they doing? They're not doing anything. They are not doing the right thing.
Farhan Fahiz is afraid he'll seem ungrateful if he criticises Victim Support, but he wants the money distributed to the people it was intended for now.
This money isn't really Victim Support's money, it's the money from the people of New Zealand, and technically Victim Support is just a third party who's supposed to help people like myself and others. I feel that they're just simply not doing their job.
So what does Victim Support have to say about all of this? Once more, they weren't available. For Checkpoint, ko Veronica Schmidt-Aho.
Years-old tubing is likely to be responsible for the delay in re-entering the Pike River mine. But the last-minute delay didn't stop the families making an emotional trip up to the entrance of the mine today, where 29 men lost their lives more than 8 years ago. It was a bittersweet moment on what was supposed to have been D-Day for finally entering the coal mine. Our reporter Logan Church is in Greymouth and he joins us via live view. Logan.
Hi Lisa, yes, it certainly wasn't the day that many of the Pike River families were expecting. Some had travelled quite a considerable distance to be here today, some overseas, to witness the formal re-entry of Pike River mine. That initial team, the first team to go in, was to consist of Chief Operating Officer Dingy Passenson and 2 other miners. However, all those plans, of course, ground to a halt when this week the Pike River Recovery Agency detected higher than normal levels of oxygen, about 3.4% to be exact, deep within the mine, just above Rockfall, which is an area that separates the mine workings and the long drift, which is the entry tunnel that runs towards the mine. So while the agency figures out what's caused this higher level of oxygen, as oxygen's not supposed to be at that level at that point, all those plans to re-enter are currently suspended for now. A ceremony, of course, was planned for today, and although no re-entry did take place, that ceremony went ahead anyway. Just before midday, families of the 29 miners still inside the mine arrived at the entrance. The portal itself is in a small gully, native forest towering above it. The sounds of a nearby river competing with the thud of a massive mining fan. Some of the families here are locals. Some had come from overseas. The plan was for a loader, which is sort of like a bulldozer, to come up the hill here, drive into the portal 30 metres down the mine to the concrete seal, remove the last of the concrete so the first 3 miners can enter the mine. But the delay wasn't putting anyone off here today. A small ceremony went ahead anyway. More than 100 family members, mine workers, supporters, media and politicians, including the Prime Minister and Pike Re-entry Minister Andrew Little, were in attendance. A song, co-written by Rowdy Durbridge, a Pike River father and former worker, spoke of the tragedy and the impact it had on them.
The boys at the bottom, the men in the mine, the crew at the coalface, we're working shift time.
Family members Anna Osborne and Sonia Rockhouse also made speeches, as well as agency staff and Andrew Little.
I brought with me an additional member of the team for the period from now on. It is St. Barbara. Now, St. Barbara is the patron saint of mining and tunnelling. I think she's going to be placed somewhere at a place at the entrance here, and she will provide that just a little bit of symbolic guidance and oversight as the project continues from here on in.
Joanne Ufer travelled from Singleton in Australia this week, expecting to see the mine re-entered. She lost her son Josh in the explosion. But even after she heard the news it was delayed, she told me it was well worth coming. It's been half a decade since she's been at the mine site.
Right here, I came up probably about 4 or 5 years ago with a friend. Just the two of us, obviously escorted up, but it wasn't a very good experience at the time, so I was a bit dubious about coming back today. But just all the families being around and the positivity, despite the call yesterday to call the breaching of the seal off, I just thought that it's been where I need to be.
I met Joanne at her home in Singleton in New South Wales last year, and at the time she said part of her didn't believe the re-entry would actually happen.
And I think that was another reason why I wanted to be here in person, was to see it with my own eyes, that this is actually happening. Disappointing that I haven't seen it this time, but there might be the opportunity in weeks, months to come back over.
You'd come back to see that?
Yeah, obviously if it's next week, it's not going to happen. But if it's in a week, in a month or a couple of months' time, I'll definitely be here.
The Prime Minister didn't make a speech, but received a wooden box made for her by the family members. Afterwards, she was asked if she would return here when the re-entry actually happens.
I'm actually going to leave it to the families. I think they've waited long enough, and I think it's important that we give them that time.
But the big question is still when that re-entry will take place. The work stopped after unusually high oxygen levels, about 3.4%, were found in borehole 51, just above the rockfall deep in the mine tunnel. That was detected when work began drilling out the concrete seal 30 metres inside the mine. We can see rags being used to plug the holes the drill had already made in the seal. The bits of concrete were laying on the ground outside the mine. The problem is that no one knows how that oxygen got so far into the mine. But the agency's Chief Operating Officer, Dingy Pattinson, says he thinks a leak is likely in the tubing that runs out of one of the mine's many boreholes.
They come out of your borehole singly, then they all meet and they run down in a big bundle.
And you think that there's quite a high possibility that the problem is due to those tubes, somewhere along the line?
Yes, I do. I think it's a high probability. Now, it could be a leaking join, it could be like a wee pinhole in the tube. That's all it takes. And it's when we change the pressure underground, we go from positive pressure to a low pressure, then it appears that there's oxygen leaking in through a hole or a joint or something, mixing with a sample that's going through the tube, and it's showing oxygen.
And how long have those tubes been here? Have they been put in recently, or have they been there for some time?
That one particular in borehole 51, that was probably drilled, I would say, around about 2014. So it's been here for four to 5 years, so.
Is that considered old?
Oh no, it's not so much old. Tubes last for years, but it's an environment they're subject to. And it is a pretty harsh environment up here, in the winter time and everything like that. And so we'll take care of it.
So for now, the mine stays shut, with no word yet when the re-entry will happen. At Pike River Mine for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
29 ghosts in the ground.
Checkpoint on RNZ National, the family of a mental health patient demands answers from the Canterbury DHB after she was found in an emaciated state. The Queenstown Lakes residents are poised to decide if they back a proposed 5% bed tax, and India prepares for one of the biggest storms to hit its shores in decades. We would love your feedback. Don't forget, you can get in touch with us on text 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And if you'd like to look at Logan Church's piece, if you were just listening, that will go up online and on our Facebook page a little later. But now it's time for the headlines.
People from the Christchurch Muslim community want to know why victim support is taking so long to distribute millions donated following the March terrorist attacks. They say people too traumatised to work don't or can't pay their bills and need the money. Victim support raised $10.5 million after the shootings and are also in control of almost $3 million raised by predominantly Muslim groups, but so far just over $3 million has been distributed. Beneficiary advocates say the government isn't moving fast enough on reforms to the welfare system. The 200-page report of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group was released this afternoon, and it contains 42 recommendations for changes to social security. But the Social Development Minister, Kamal Sepuloni, has announced just 3 changes, 2 of which will come into effect next year. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, and her long-term partner, Clark Gayford, are getting married. A spokesperson has confirmed the couple were engaged over the Easter break. Jacinda Ardern and Clark Gayford first met at an awards event in 2012. A spokesperson for Ms Ardern won't confirm any details other than that the pair got engaged in Mayhew over the Easter holidays. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has had to rein in 2 of her ministers for getting personal about Paula Bennett's Māori heritage. A slanging match erupted this week when senior Māori members of the coalition government went on the attack against the National Party deputy leader and her whakapapa. A breakage in a vital piece of equipment is being blamed for the delay in the much-awaited re-entry of the Pike River mine. The re-entry to investigate the mine explosion that killed 29 miners had to be called off at the 11th hour because of potentially dangerous levels of oxygen. The Pike River Recovery Agency's Dingy Pattinson says a breakage in a pipe is the most likely cause of the oxygen levels reading, and further tests are underway with new equipment. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Let's go to business now with Madison Reedy, who's joined me in the studio. We're wearing matching white shirts if you're just listening in.
All 3 of us are, actually.
Yeah, actually, Checkpoint uniform. So, Maddie, in the business news, liquidation of Halifax. You've got a bit of an update.
Halifax is the online trading platform that hit the wall late last year when its Australian parent, Halifax Investment Services, went into administration, and then its local New Zealand subsidiary followed in its footsteps. They're now both in liquidation. Now, thousands of investors, both in Australia and New Zealand, their money remains frozen in their Halifax accounts. They're holding up to about $220 million, but $20 million is missing. We already knew this. Now, this is because directors of Halifax in Australia commingled the funds between Australian and New Zealand investors, and they actually did use some of it to keep the business afloat too. Now, interestingly, in the past couple of days, the director and owner of Halifax in Australia, his name is Jeffrey Warboys, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission has banned him from providing a financial service for the next 6 years. Now, they say that's because he lacked integrity, lacked professionalism, and was incompetent to the point of being likely to actually break laws. Now, this was in his role as the chief executive of another investment firm called Australian Mutual Holdings, but it is not good news for investors in Halifax. I spoke to the liquidator of Halifax today. His name's Morgan Kelly. He's based in Sydney. He confirmed to me that this is the same Jeffrey Warboys who runs and owns Halifax, and he said that he's actually found similar issues related to Mr. Warboys in his own investigation of Halifax. Now, he's told authorities in Australia, he's told ASIC of that, and he's also talking to its equivalent, the Financial Markets Authority here. Now, when I asked him for an update on the liquidation process, it went into liquidation in March, so it's been a couple of months. He said that he's actually preparing case studies on investors. So some investors are in better and worse situations, depending on whether or not their money was or wasn't commingled with those funds, or whether or not it was used to float the business. Now, he's going to prepare case studies on them and actually give them to courts both in New Zealand and Australia, seeking an order on how to disperse the repayments to them, whether or not he should treat them all the same and give them a flat payment to assume that all of their money was commingled, or whether or not some should be reimbursed directly. He expects that to be filed within about the next 3 weeks.
Wow, that sounds complicated. Okay, so we got a monetary policy statement which is out next week. I mean, how much attention is that going to get?
This one should actually get quite a lot of attention. The monetary policy statement is coming out on Wednesday. It's being announced in Wellington by the Reserve Bank Governor. Now, the market is expecting the Governor and the Reserve Bank to actually cut the OCR, the official cash rate, which is wholesale interest rates, on Wednesday. They're expecting a drop by at least 25 basis points. Now, that would take our historically low interest rate at the moment, which is 1.75%. It would drop it down to 1.5%. Now, the reason the market is expecting this is because all signs are pointing to a slowing economy at the moment, and that's essentially setting the scene for a rate cut. So yesterday we had those weak labour market figures. We've also had weaker than expected inflation figures lately, also still low business confidence and flat consumer confidence too. Now, the Reserve Bank has been, as the Governor puts it, watching, worrying and waiting to make a move for the past 2.5 years. So we may likely see a move finally on Wednesday.
All the W's.
We will give you all of the updates of that next week.
All right, so as we get to the end of the week, how are the markets looking?
The NZX Top 50 Index is down just 0.3% tonight. That's a fall of 28 points to close at 10,058. The New Zealand dollar is buying at 66.2 US cents, 94.6 to the Australian and 50.8 British pence.
Thanks, Madison. Madison Reedy with business news. A Christchurch woman who is under the care of Canterbury's DHB, Mental Health Services, has been admitted to hospital in such an emaciated state that her family fear she was days away from dying. The 61-year-old has been treated for mental health issues since she was a teenager and currently lives with one of her brothers in Christchurch. Last week, the woman, who RNZ has agreed not to name, was visited by a caseworker who found her weighing just 44 kilograms and wearing soiled clothes. Another brother, Christchurch man Jeff Aiken, says when he saw his sister in hospital, she looked like someone who'd been in a concentration camp, and he believes she was only days away from death. The woman's sister, Jenny Chibdinsky, who lives in Australia, told our reporter Rachel Graham that the Canterbury DHB's psychiatric services were supposed to be checking on the woman regularly.
It was my understanding her case manager and social worker and a community worker visited my sister regularly, and when I say that, it's once a fortnight for some of them, once a month for others.
And do you believe that's been happening?
No.
And so you don't know when she was last actually checked in on to make sure she is getting the care that she needs?
The last time she was checked was last Tuesday by her case manager, when she was immediately removed because of her condition. She was emaciated and filthy.
And you don't know when she was checked before that? Have they indicated when they actually have seen her, checked in on her?
I believe a comment was made that a social worker may have visited the week before.
Do you think that's the case? I mean, if she have gone that far downhill?
I don't honestly know.
Okay, is that something that you are looking? Are you hoping for some information about that sort of aspect of it?
I've been waiting from the day the case manager called me, which was Wednesday of last week, to hear some news of my sister's condition, some report on the tests being done, and what's being done to further her situation to improve it.
Okay, and I mean, what is her condition in terms of what are you concerned about with how she is now?
I was told by the case manager and by my elder brother who went to see her. She had a festering burn on her leg. She weighed 44 kilos. She was in appalling condition, smelling of faeces and urine, and she's unable to walk unaided, and her room was filthy with a pile of soiled clothes.
And I guess that's where, if she is she's obviously in a vulnerable situation, she would need to make sure that that whoever is looking after her is actually taking the steps that they need to. I mean, that's what you have expected was happening from the local DHB?
Certainly, that she was actually being regularly checked, and my sister shouldn't be living like that.
And that was Jenny Chabdinsky speaking to Rachel Graham. The Canterbury DHB has been contacted for comment but hasn't yet responded. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern appears to have reined in two of her ministers for getting personal about Paula Bennett's Māori heritage. A very public slanging match erupted this week when three senior Māori members of the coalition government went on the attack about the National Party deputy leader and her whakapapa. Mrs Bennett described it as a racist attack and out of sync with Ms Ardern's attempts to make Parliament a kinder place. Here's our political reporter Joe Moyer.
National MP Paula Bennett says the rhetoric from senior Māori ministers doesn't gel at all with what Jacinda Ardern has been saying she wants to change about politics.
So we have a Prime Minister that is constantly saying she wants to change the way that Parliament is and parliamentarians treat each other. And she now has some of her senior Māori ministers going out there and categorising other parliamentarians as not being Māori enough. And I don't think that gels at all with the kind of Parliament that she's trying to create.
This all kicked off in general debate on Wednesday when Labour Māori Caucus co-chair Willie Jackson attacked several of National's Māori MPs, saying they were useless and that Mrs Bennett doesn't know if she's a Māori from one day to the next. The comments spilled into question time on Thursday when Mrs Bennett bit back, using Mr Jackson's Mana and Mahi youth employment program to ask whether you need a Māori-sounding surname to participate, or will he be telling people with the name Bidwar that they should go back to Italy. That prompted the Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters to go into bat for Mr Jackson. Then Whānau Order Minister Penny Henare also joined in.
I haven't seen her contribution in the community and for Māori kaupapa. I haven't seen her on the marae, I haven't seen her dry dishes, I haven't seen her do a karanga. Therefore, it should be raised in the question.
Mr Jackson walked back his comments somewhat on RNZ this morning, saying his point was that Mrs Bennett didn't support National MPs like Nuk Karako, who do contribute to kaupapa Māori.
Of course she's Māori. I've never said that she's not Māori. I said in question time yesterday that she's whakapapa's Māori. How do you identify with being Māori? By your whakapapa. Is Paula Māori? 100%. So she's twisted and spun this, and she's got away from the real deal here, which is her reluctance and her non-support of a tremendous Māori MP who's advocated kaupapa Māori and real Māori every day.
Mr Henare stood by his and Mr Jackson's comments on Radio Wātea today.
I think the point he raised was valid and raised it in only the way that Willie can. And my experience and upbringing tells me whakapapa is certainly one thing, but if we look through what makes a Māori through a Pākehā lens, then we're only looking at either a classification or a blood quantum. And what I'm saying is actually that is one part of it, but there is so much more to being a Māori.
But the Prime Minister has had to go into damage control. A spokesperson says while the Prime Minister understood her MP's desire to hold all members to account on the work they do for their local communities, she has an expectation that this doesn't become personal. The Prime Minister didn't respond to questions about whether she had spoken to her ministers and what message she had passed on. Subsequently, Mr Henare declined an interview with RNZ about the matter. Mrs Bennett says she isn't looking for an apology, but she thinks it speaks volumes about what Māori mean to the Labour Party.
It's not me that needs the apology. As I say, it's the thousands like me out there that right now will be wondering what Labour actually stands for when it comes to Māori.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
One of the most powerful storms to hit India in decades is making landfall on the country's northeast coast and is due to make a direct hit on the state of Odisha. Cyclone Fani is making a direct hit on the state where hundreds of thousands of residents have been evacuated. It has winds of up to 220 kilometres an hour, and forecasters say torrential rain could bring a storm surge of more than 1.5 metres to low-lying areas. The UN has warned the cyclone could have a devastating effect. The BBC's Ramzan Kumali has this report.
Ominous dark clouds overhead and strong winds battering this town on India's east coast. But it's just a prelude for Cyclone Fani. Officials may be braced as Fani heads up the Bay of Bengal. But with winds expected to reach speeds of 220 kilometres an hour and 100 million people in its path, precautions have been taken. Many in the most exposed areas are seeking safety while they still can. Around 800,000 have been evacuated from low-lying regions. Hundreds of emergency shelters have been set up and schools and universities closed.
Now we are first trying to evacuate the pregnant women and the lactating mothers, and particularly the old people and people in thatched houses, because they are more prone to danger. So we are just trying to lessen the human casualties.
Forecasters have been tracking Fani's progress as the eye of the cyclone approaches Odisha state.
This storm system has a number of hazards attached to it. We've got torrential rain, 200 or 300 millimetres of rain on this, and ahead of the storm we'll get a storm surge working in across parts of Odisha, West Bengal and even into parts of Bangladesh, and that poses the threat of some significant flooding as well.
Officials will be using these forecasts to help them plan emergency operations. Thousands of relief workers have been deployed, and the government has set up a $14 million relief and rescue fund in anticipation. But those officials are also warning that many homes and infrastructure caught in Cyclone Fani's path are likely to be completely destroyed.
And that was the BBC's Ramzan Kumali. It is about 10 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program today. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Queenstown Lakes residents will get to decide within a fortnight if they back a proposed 5% bed tax to tackle the growing burden of visitors to the tourist hotspot. The Queenstown Lakes District Council today revealed details of a plan to impose a bed tax on all short-term visitors. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has the story.
Mayor Jim Bolt says the choice for residents is simple: back the council's proposed bed tax or pick up the bill, which could be hundreds of millions of dollars over the next decade.
Well, the alternatives are either significantly increased rates, in some cases an increase of up to 35%. The other pathway, of course, is simply for us to slow investment in infrastructure and suffer the consequences of that through further congestion and failing infrastructure, which I don't think is anything that our visitors or our residents would find acceptable.
Jim Bolt believes most locals support the proposal and says many accommodation providers have contacted him supporting the measure and noting something needs to be done. He wants to see a strong voter turnout for the referendum. If more than 50% of those who vote back the plan, the council will take its plans to central government.
We'll present the outcome of that to government, along with our analysis of how a levy could be implemented and operated. It'll then be for central government to determine the next steps that they take and to develop the appropriate legislation.
A visitor levy would need to go through Parliament. A bill allowing a levy to be imposed on visitors to Stewart Island was passed in 2012. Mr Bolt says he is aware some accommodation providers are concerned about the impact of a bed tax, but his rubbish claims it would impact on visitor numbers.
If you take an example of a $250 hotel room, that's $12.50 for the room. If there's two people in it, that's $6.25 each. And many people spend more than that on just one drink in a bar If people are put off coming here by a charge of $6, well, maybe that indicates that those visitors are not ones that are contributing economically to our district.
The levy would be payable by all visitors to the district, which includes Wanaka and Arrowtown, who stay for less than 4 weeks, including providers such as Airbnb hosts. It would be added to the visitors' bill by the accommodation providers. Without the levy, Council Chief Executive Mike Tearlin says it won't be possible to increase capital spending and the council will need to take on more debt.
We've analysed the expenditure that we know we have, which is the expenditure in this current 2018 to 2028 10-year plan. The figure that we've identified as being driven from visitor-related expenditure is around $374 million over that 10-year period.
While Freedom Campers are off the hook with the proposed measure, the council's Finance, Legal and Regulatory General Manager, Stuart Burns, says they remain in the council's sights.
We've recognised them as being an exception from the model as it currently stands, but we'll be looking at ways of getting a contribution from them in time. We don't have the answers for that today, I'm sorry.
Villa del Lago owner Nick Kittle says he and dozens of other accommodation providers are concerned about the levy as it unfairly targets one sector involved in the tourist industry.
We think that that's a bit of smoke and mirrors on the part of the council. There's no doubt about it that the obligation and the liability to pay the tax will be on the accommodation business. So whether or not we recover the money from the visitor, we will have to pay that tax. It's not the visitor that pays it, it's us that pay it.
The referendum papers will begin landing in residents' letterboxes on May the 14th, and preliminary results are expected on the day it closes, June the 5th. In Queenstown, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
A meditation centre locked in a bitter dispute with a shooting club has no confidence Auckland Council will enforce a Court of Appeal decision banning the club from operating. Locals say lengthy and intense shooting at the shooting club north of Auckland has continued since the court ruling on April the 10th. They say complaints have been lodged with Council, but they don't think any action will be taken. Joanna McKenzie reports.
John Raffaelli lives on Tuherangi Road in the Makaro Valley north of Kaukopakapa, close to the shooting club. He says the club's signage has been taken down since it lost the Court of Appeal decision, but the shooting hasn't stopped.
They say it's friends, but it's an awful lot of friends that seem to have a code to get through into the shooting club.
Mr Raffaelli says at least 20 cars were at the club on Saturday, and yesterday there were reports of lots of vehicles and heavy gunfire. He says neighbours are unsurprised the shootings continued because previous abatement notices have been ignored.
Although we kind of expected it because it's happened before, it's not a surprise to anyone, but it's like what process then do we have to go through to stop it? You think you're going through a lot of hoops, but it kind of seems to be never ending because they just carry on.
The owner of the gun club, Raymond O'Brien, was approached by RNZ for an interview about the shooting continuing, but he says he has no comment to make. Kirsty McKay, a trustee of the Vipassana Meditation Centre, has been fighting the club's right to operate for 3 years. She says the rule that allows informal shooting with just friends is being seriously stretched.
Taking your signs down and pretending you're not a club while allowing all members access to a site that was constructed in error, it's unacceptable.
Ms McKay says during the course of the long legal battle, the club has been ordered to stop operating before, but gunfire continued with no repercussions from council.
Last time the certificate was cancelled, the same thing happened. The club founders were overseas and members just continued shooting all day, every day. Council said they'd investigate and nothing was done. So there's not a great deal of confidence in council at this point.
She's asked Auckland Council how it intends to identify whether what's been happening is organised formal shooting or recreational shooting among friends. But she says she's yet to receive a response.
Council have refused to answer any direct questions. They're not helpful at all. Last time this happened, they said that there would be an investigation, and despite being provided with ample evidence, even of actual events that took place, competitive events, nothing was done. I think they need to step up and do their job.
In a statement, Auckland Council says it's received several complaints from locals about firearm use at the property and an investigation is underway. Resource Consents Manager Ian Dobson says some recreational shooting is allowed, but only if it falls under the definition of informal recreation in the unitary plan. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Joanna McKenzie aho.
The actor who played one of Star Wars' most memorable characters has died. Peter Mayhew, who played the 200-year-old Wookiee Chewbacca, died at home in Texas. Eve Johnson reports.
Peter Mayhew, the actor who played Star Wars Chewbacca in films across decades, has died at the age of 74. On Thursday, his family announced his passing at home in Texas. No cause of death was given. At more than 7 feet tall, Mayhew was born to play the 200-year-old Wookiee, a stalwart companion and co-pilot of space rogue Han Solo, first seen in the original 1977 movie. However, in a statement, his family said he had, quote, fought his way back from being wheelchair-bound for his final turn as Chewie, 2015's The Force Awakens. He also consulted off-camera in its sequel, The Last Jedi, helping to train his successor, Jonas Suotamo, in the ways of playing a Wookiee. Remembrances have poured in from across the Star Wars galaxy. Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, called Mayhew, quote, the gentlest of giants and a loyal friend. In a statement, Harrison Ford, who played Han Solo, said Mayhew, quote, invested his soul in the character. And that, quote, I and millions of others will never forget Peter and what he gave us all. His family says they are planning a public memorial service for fans in December.
And that was Eve Johnson reporting. Poor Chewie. Going back to one of our earlier stories about people who were traumatised in the Christchurch mosque attacks but not physically injured. They're waiting to get money and wondering where all the victim support money is. Maureen from Christchurch says, Kia ora, Lisa, after nearly 7 weeks, we who donated are angry that those traumatised people are further stressed. It is not okay.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. The Green Party is backing the government's limited reforms of the welfare system, but it acknowledges that struggling families have been waiting a long time for change. The overhaul of the welfare system was promised as part of Labour's confidence and supply deal with the Greens. The 200-page report of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group has been released this afternoon, and it contains 42 recommendations for changes to social security. But the government has announced just 3 changes, 2 of which will come into effect on April the 1st next year. The Green Party co-leader, Marama Davidson, says that's just the first step.
I know that for families it's far too late for too many families. I know that there are children who have missed out on things, on living with dignity, for actually over 30 years of successive governments not having a good enough system. I know this is urgent. Greens are clear this is urgent. We want to work with our partners to fix this.
The Green Party co-leader, Marama Davidson. Families of the 29 men who died in the Pike mine disaster have made an emotional trip to its entrance. Among those at today's gathering was Chloe Nipa, who lost her husband Kane. Accompanying Mrs. Nipa was her 10-year-old son Kalani, who was only 16 months old when the mine exploded. They were among a group of about 50 family members who gathered to hear why there has been a delay in re-entering the mine. It was the first time they had made the trip up to the mine. Mrs. Nipa says it was important for them to be there and she can't wait for a team to re-enter the mine. She says life without her husband has been tough.
It has been really hard to be a single mum and have to deal with my emotions as well as him as he's growing up and trying to deal with what's happened as well and trying to explain to him, even though he seems, I think, to know more than me half the time.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time.
It's only math that you got me here on.
Chloe and Kalani Nipa. Years old, tubing is likely to be responsible for the delay in re-entering Pike River. People too traumatised by the Christchurch mosque attacks to work want to know why victim support is holding on to millions donated to the city's Muslim community. Victim support raised $10.5 million after the shootings and are also in control of almost $3 million raised by 7 predominantly Muslim groups. Just over $3 million has been distributed. Farhan Fahiz was at the Linwood Mosque on the 15th of March. Mr. Fahiz has post-traumatic stress and is not well enough to work. He says he is behind on his rent and bills and is relying on a friend's generosity to eat.
This money isn't really victim support's money, it's the money from the people of New Zealand, and technically victim support is just a third party who's supposed to help people like myself and others. I feel that they're simply not doing their job.
Fahan Fahiz. Victim support says distributing the money is extremely complex and takes time. The Royal Commission into the terrorist attack on two Christchurch mosques will have an active presence in both Christchurch and Wellington. The inquiry, which will be headed by Supreme Court Justice Sir William Young, is allowed to begin considering evidence from May the 13th. The $8.2 million investigation will examine the shooter's activities, use of social media and international connections, as well as the priorities of the New Zealand intelligence and security agencies. The team is to report back to the Governor-General by December the 10th. A meditation centre, which has fought against a shooting club north of Auckland, has no faith in the City Council to enforce a Court of Appeal decision banning its operation. The centre and many locals say lengthy and intense shooting at the Auckland Shooting Club in Makaro has continued despite last month's court ruling banning the club's operations. Kirsty McKay from the Vipassana Meditation Centre says complaints have been lodged with the council, but she has no confidence it will take any action.
Council have refused to answer any direct questions. They're not helpful at all. Last time this happened, they said that there would be an investigation, and despite being provided with ample evidence, nothing was done. I think they need to step up and do their job.
Kirsty McKay. Auckland Council says it's received several complaints about firearm use at the property on Tuhirangi Road, and an investigation is underway. Cyclone Fani is making landfall in northeast India, where more than 1 million coastal residents have been evacuated. It crossed the coast near the city of Pune in Odisha state, where schools have been closed and all flights and trains cancelled. Kirta Mishra is from Catholic Relief Services in the region and says conditions are deteriorating.
As of now, the weather is getting really bad. A landfall process has already begun in Puri, with a wind speed of 180 kilometers, gusting up to 200 kilometers per hour. Rains are heavy. We are getting reports from the field. The trees have collapsed, poles are uprooted. Some of the walls of the buildings have collapsed.
Kirta Mishra from India's Catholic Relief Service. The cyclone is the most powerful to hit India in 20 years. It's 6:05. The Wellington Phoenix football coach Mark Gruden is bullish about his side's chances of upsetting the defending champions Melbourne Victory in tonight's A-League sudden death playoff in Melbourne. The Phoenix must win to advance to the semi-finals. The two teams have met 3 times this season, with each game ending in a draw.
We've got a lot of confidence knowing that we've played well against them on all 3 occasions. We want to go one better and beat them this time, and they'll be saying the same thing. But the focus is on us and making sure that, we get our game plan right. I don't have to talk about motivating them because they understand exactly what's going on.
Mark Gruden, the match kicks off at 9:50 p.m. Being humble is not a trait which immediately springs to mind when talking about Australian cricketers, but coach Justin Langer says that Steve Smith and David Warner will need to show humility upon their return to the Australian side. Former captain Smith and vice-captain Warner were named in Australia's World Cup squad last month after their ball tampering bans expired, but they will play under new skipper Aaron Finch. The pair return to training with the team in Brisbane today. New Zealand shot putter Tom Walsh begins his Diamond League title defence tomorrow morning at the season opening event in Doha. And New Zealand golfers Lydia Ko and Danny Lee have struggled in their opening rounds at the latest LPGA and PGA events. Ko is 3 over par in a tie for 85th, while Lee is 4 over in a tie for 116th. That's the news.
From 5 a.m. Monday, there's a new show in town on RNZ National.
Atamaria, welcome to First Up. I'm Indira Stewart.
A fresh early morning news and current affairs conversation every weekday morning at 5, hosted by Indira Stewart.
Still to come on First Up, we find out why Fonterra have changed their entire milk tanker schedule in Te Rapa district.
Featuring the people behind the key issues.
Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, is with us for the regular weekly interview.
Great program coming up this morning.
Indira Stewart sets up your day on First Up from 5 a.m. Monday on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, cloudy periods with the odd light shower. Auckland to Waitomo in the central high country, including Bay of Plenty, also Whanganui. fine apart from areas of fog or low cloud morning and night. Gisborne through to Wairarapa, cloud spreading north today, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Taranaki, also Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow with the odd light shower. For Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine apart from isolated showers about the Sounds tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from low cloud about the coast tonight and tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, fine spells today, becoming cloudy tomorrow with showers in Westland spreading to Bulla after dark. Fiordland, cloud increasing today with late drizzle, rain tomorrow heavy from the afternoon. Southland, fine today, high cloud increasing tomorrow with scattered rain from the evening. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few light showers today. It's 6:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government has already rejected a key recommendation from its Welfare Advisory Group to immediately raise benefits by up to 47%, for now at least. The advisory group's long-awaited report makes more than 40 recommendations, including 4 it says should be adopted right away. The rise in benefit levels was one of them. It also recommends all the changes, which could cost an extra $5.2 billion a year, be brought in within 2 years. So far, the government has announced an extra 263 frontline MSD staff and that it will ditch sanctions against mainly female beneficiaries who won't name their child's father. It will also raise the amount of money beneficiaries can earn before their benefit is docked. I asked Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni if Labor wants to be a fair, kind and transformational government, why not adopt all the report's recommendations?
Even the expert advisory group have pointed out on numerous occasions throughout the report that the system is very complex. You move something over here, it has an impact over there. So we need to make sure that any changes we make are well considered and that we do end up ensuring that New Zealanders are better off.
So it made, among the more than 40 recommendations, there was about 4 it said it believes should be implemented immediately. No sooner had the report been released and you immediately ruled out one of those key recommendations, which was raising benefits up to 47%. Why did you do that?
Look, Lisa, let's keep it in perspective here. We received the report 9 weeks ago and have just gone public with it. And we've made very clear that we need to have 2 phases here. The first phase is what we can do immediately. The second phase is actually sorting out a very well thought through plan and how we can actually implement some of the other recommendations.
So why not just leave it on the table in the meantime? Why not rule it out? Why rule it out like you did?
Oh, with regards to
why not leave
budget?
it on the table? Yeah.
Because we're ruling it out for this budget, Lisa. 9 weeks ago is when we received that report, keeping in mind that consideration with regard to budget goes back to October last year. So it's ruled out for this budget.
But it wouldn't be a surprise to you that raising benefits was probably one of the things that would be recommended, given on the campaign trail, the plight of beneficiaries is one that you refer to often and the lack of income that they had. So you could have taken it into account, this budget.
We want to do it right, Lisa, and any changes that we make have to be well considered. When you make a change like that, you also have to take into consideration other parts of the system, things like accommodation supplement, temporary additional support, all the other things that potentially would have to move that you need to give some consideration to. So it's not easy to move that quickly on benefit increases.
So what time frame do you give that? If not immediately, when could you see that happening in the foreseeable future? Next budget?
Well, like I said today, this is a 2-phased approach. It's what can we do immediately and also with that first phase, taking stock of what we already have done or are doing that is in line with the report. But the second phase is thinking through a plan and agreeing on a plan with our coalition and our confidence and supply partners for the next 3 to 5 years, because this is big. What they have proposed here.
You might not be here in 5 years though, so this is your chance to be transformational now. So can you give any kind of undertaking that raising benefits will be something that you will bid for in the next budget round?
We're going to be looking at all those recommendations really carefully. Can I just say, Lisa, though, transformational, absolutely, that's the type of government we want to be. But being transformational also means making sure that the changes we make are enduring. And so that takes a little bit more of a think through.
But the national government, okay, they were the first government in 40 years is to raise benefit levels. Surely you want to at least equal that achievement, a Labor government.
Then they were lost, Lisa, because there was no consideration for the wider welfare system. And so there was an immediate benefit, yes, to those families, but our welfare system was not fixed in any way. And there was no future-proofing any of those benefits for anyone else that was going to come into the welfare system. And so we need to think about that to ensure that we're future-proofing with regards to the decisions that we make as well.
Is this principally a budget issue? Because it would cost $5.2 billion in additional funding a year. That is a big wodge of money. Are you constrained by money?
Look, the report is really clear about us needing to take a cross-sector approach to this, and I absolutely endorse that. This is not just about MSD. This is about well-being across government with regards to the sectors and serving the people that we are there to serve.
Is money stopping you doing it all in one go?
No, I want to see what happens from this report.
Money's not
I
a
want to see, Lisa, changes in the health system, and that's reinforced in the report as well. Housing has to be addressed. That's reinforced in the report as well. So this is not purely an MSD exercise. This is a cross-government exercise, and it's about the well-being of New Zealanders.
I understand that totally, but I would just like a really straightforward answer from you. Is the cost of this a barrier to implementing it in the next two budgets?
There are cost considerations for any government, and we are thinking holistically about the well-being of New Zealanders.
So cost is
I'm
an
not
issue
going
for
to
you.
say that all of the money needs to be directed towards MSD. I'm saying that as a government, we're considering the overall well-being of New Zealanders. And so I, as the Minister for Social Development, have a vested interest, and I will be watching carefully the investment that's made in the health sector and the housing sector as well, because it's about how we better serve the people that we're here to serve.
Do you need to raise your debt cap in order to achieve this?
Look, Lisa, I'm not going to get into a budget discussion because I'm not the Minister of Finance.
I know, but you're after some of his money, aren't you? So speaking of the Minister of Finance, can we expect any more for welfare in terms of additional spending in this budget coming up, other than what you've announced today?
I'm not going to preempt what might be in the budget today. I announced 3 pre-budget announcements.
Let me put it another way. Have you bid for anything else? Don't tell us whether you got the money, but did you bid for more than what you've announced?
I will tell you now. Just wait and see when the budget is announced.
OK, so where does tackling inequality and child poverty sit on your list of priorities?
It's an absolute priority for this government.
So number one?
It is. Child poverty reduction is something that our Prime Minister has taken on board as something that she is actually leading. And so clearly that is a priority for this government.
OK, because this report tells us that if you do what they recommend, you could raise 40% of the children in poor households out of poverty, 30% of working adults in poverty out of poverty. Why would you not grab that opportunity with both hands and run with it?
I think, Lisa, you're oversimplifying what was a very complex report that was put before, which is a very complex report and very fulsome report that was put to us. There was also a very substantial section on things like housing, and so all of those things need to be taken into consideration when we're looking at ensuring that we are looking at the well-being of New Zealanders.
So Labor lost out on capital gains. If you don't embrace this report in its fullness, what is left for a government that is promising transformational change?
Transformational change, Lisa, has to be done in a considered way. And as I said to you earlier, I've said, publicly today, this government has committed to an overhaul of the welfare system. But we are attempting to fix decades of damage that's been done in the welfare system and policies that have been implemented. And if the expectation is that we can do that 9 weeks after we've received the report, then I think that's a little bit unrealistic.
No, but the report does recommend that you do it within 2 years. Can you achieve it in 2 years? Because they think you can.
Well, Lisa, we've got phase 2 of our plan to flesh out, and I'm looking forward to working with our coalition partner and with our confidence and supply partner to be able to do that.
So no commitment to achieve these goals within 2 years?
I'm not going to preempt what will be part of phase 2. All I can say is that we've been provided with an exceptional report, a very fulsome analysis of our welfare system, what does work, what doesn't work. Also some limitations in there that they've stated themselves with regards to not necessarily having the time to work out where there may be interactions with other parts of the system. And so those are the types of things that we need to look at now.
OK, so you've mentioned your confidence and supply partner and your coalition partner. Are you all on the same page with this?
Absolutely.
You sure?
Absolutely.
And that was the Minister Carmel Sepuloni. And the Green Party has said it will support the limited changes announced to benefits today, even though they fall short of the full welfare overhaul promised in its confidence and supply agreement with Labour. I asked co-leader Marama Davidson if she considers the changes announced a win.
The report was very clear. Incomes are inadequate. But we've had over 30 years of accrual system, so a start is definitely a win. There's a lot more to do.
But this is your chance to be transformational. Why aren't you taking that opportunity?
We're going to get to our confidence and supply agreement, and you're right. This is urgent, and this is what the Greens support. The Greens support raising core benefits. The Greens welcome the announcements by the Minister today, and we've got to work hard to overhaul the rest of the system.
So when are you going to get to it? Because the press release put out by the Minister today says we've decided not to implement the recommendations to increase benefit levels by up to 47% immediately. So after this budget, you got one more budget left. When are you getting to it?
Yep, and so now is the opportunity for all of us to work together in government and make sure we've got things in place for the next government. The Minister was clear today there's also a 3 to 5 year plan to overhaul the welfare system across the whole. But look, I absolutely know how important it is for families and children that we make those changes, that people need enough to live on. So that's what the Greens are going to work hard for.
So are you going to vote with Labour on these changes, or are you going to exercise some power and protest over it?
Again, this is a start, and so it's important that we support these changes into place, and there's more work to do, Lisa.
Why would you support these changes when they go nowhere near to close to what you want? You've got the power here. You could say, we're not going to support this. Labour wouldn't therefore have the numbers, and you could hold out for something more. Why don't you do that?
Because the government is committed to the Green Agreement to overhaul the welfare system. So this is a start, and of course I agree to the start. This start is important. This start is after nearly 4 decades, over 3 decades of cruelty and a punishing punitive system. So this is important. That we are supporting this start, and there's more work to do.
Why not hold Labour to account here? Why not hold the coalition to account?
And that's our everyday work, and those are the discussions that we'll keep having. The Greens will keep working hard and represent the voices of the people.
But your opportunity is now. They're going to need some law changes to implement this. You're more than halfway through your term. So you're more than halfway through the term in government. Why not hold out for more? Use Winston Peters' example. He held out for more, no capital gains tax. He has jettisoned the changes to the 3 strikes, and he got his waka jumping legislation. Why don't you take a page out of his book?
Yes, and this is the start of us achieving what we said we would do, of overhauling the welfare system. So I am really pleased to support the start to this work. We've only just received the report, 8-9 weeks ago. Now that we've got the report, the Greens know that we have to work hard to get these changes for the people who have called for them all around the country, and that's what we're committed to doing. This isn't the end of our work, this is the start.
But almost everything contained in this report you knew or wanted beforehand. So what are you going to do to get these changes if the government hasn't agreed to them? Because there was a list of, 2 or 3 things that the committee said needed to be done right now, and they're not going to be done right now. So what are you going to do?
We agree. One of the priorities that the panel highlights in the report is that incomes are not enough, and I am telling people that yes, that is my job, that is the Green Party's job, to make sure that we work hard and get that agreement across the line. And now that we've got this report, the independent report that is very clear on what we need to change, that's absolutely the work that we've got to go. So this is a start, and we've got to keep going.
Aren't you sick of the taste of dead rat?
Again, Lisa, we've just got this report, and I agree. The Greens agree with nearly all of the recommendations in it, and we agree with the urgency of the changes that need to be made for families. So we will keep working hard. We will keep working with our partners to get these changes.
Those are just words, Marama. those are just words. What about actions? You have the opportunity to leverage some power here. Why don't you do that? Have you considered not voting for these changes?
We will absolutely support these changes, Lisa, because these changes...
Well, you just give away your power doing that, don't you?
These changes are important for people who have been penalised with a harsh sanction that should never have been there in the first place. So we will absolutely support the removal of this sanction, and we know that it's important that we keep working hard for the rest of the system and to get a true overhaul as well.
So are you basically telling me that anything's better than nothing here? What about transformational?
Totally agree with transforming and overhauling, and this is.
But you're not doing that.
They're not sitting in competition with each other, and and I'm also agreeing that the report was clear what we need to do. We agree with that. The Greens agree with that. This is the start. This is a start that has been a long time coming. In fact, we wouldn't even be talking about it if it wasn't for the Greens and the advocates' work, particularly on welfare. So
you're settling. You're settling.
No, we're not. We're not finished, and I've said that from the very start. We're not finished with our work. This is only the start.
So do you think that the people living in poverty in this country, the people who are living with what the report calls toxic levels of stress and just barely surviving without dignity and participation in society, that they can afford to wait?
No, they can't. And the Greens agree with that, and we know how urgent it is. So I hope that we will, that's the work that we know we've got to do, to work with our government partners. We can't do it on our own, and people are desperate, so we will keep doing that work to get these changes across the line.
So you're just going to capitulate to Labor at this point?
No, we're going to keep being the representation, keep pushing for these changes. Again, this is the start. We've got loads more work to do.
And that was Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson. 7 weeks after the Christchurch mosque attacks, the death toll has risen to 51 after a Turkish citizen passed away in hospital from his injuries. The man, whose family has asked for him not to be named, is reported to have passed away last night after 49 days in intensive care at Christchurch Hospital and about 13 surgeries. It's left members of the Al Noor Mosque, Turkish community and wider Christchurch reeling. Katie Todd reports.
The death of the 46-year-old man, who was shot in the chest at the Al Noor Mosque, was at the forefront of worshippers' minds as they headed to Friday prayers there today. Rana Shakim says the man's death would have been particularly tough for his 2 young children and wife.
They actually had a hope because that guy was in hospital and he was in ICU. He has been through a lot of surgeries, and the last surgery, I believe it was like a kind of clots in the blood, blood clots, which is not a small thing.
A spokesperson for the Turkish embassy, Mukarram Yaya Olu, says the ambassador Ergin and several other officials were travelling to Christchurch to provide support. The family includes the man's wife, as well as his mother and father, who are in Christchurch preparing to repatriate his body to Turkey.
Coffin will be prepared by the medical hospital in Christchurch in order to be transferred to Turkey. Mother and father, they are at church at the moment with their son. They will be escorting coffin going to Turkey.
Mr. Yaya Olu says the man had been in New Zealand for at least 2 years. Muslim community advocate Guled Maya says people had been keeping the injured man in their prayers and hoping for the best.
He'd been putting up a really long battle, and many in the community had been keeping him very much in their prayers. So it's absolutely tragic to hear this passing.
Another Friday prayer goer, Asif Shaikh, says after hearing the news this morning, it became more difficult to move on from the March 15 attacks.
This loss has added into our pain now, because we lost 50 people of our brothers, and my personal friends, I lost 10 friends, and one of this is added now.
But amid the sorrow, there have been outpourings of support for those who took care of the man, including from Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell.
The staff at the hospital, this must have been a real blow to them as well, because they have worked so hard to save his life.
In a statement today, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has also commended the extraordinary work of hospital staff, who are continuing to look after 9 other people in a stable condition after the attacks. She says the country is continuing to send hope for their speedy recovery. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, Katie Todd.
An employment court ruling that posties who may be required to work overtime must be paid for keeping themselves available to do so could have implications for other employers. The postal workers are already paid overtime when they work extra hours, but the employment court case was about whether or not they should be paid anything to recognise that making themselves available for overtime reduces their ability to take part in activities outside work. Anne-Marie May reports.
The availability provision was introduced to employment law in 2015 and sets out limited circumstances in which it can be included in employment agreements. Employers must have genuine reasons for using it, and workers must be reasonably compensated for keeping themselves available. New Zealand Post and Business New Zealand, which supported it in the employment court case, said the availability provision only related to 0-hour contracts, and applying it more widely could have significant unforeseen consequences for businesses. However, the employment court has ruled posties can decline to make themselves available for overtime if they're not reasonably compensated for doing so. John Maynard from the Postal Workers Union of Aotearoa says fluctuating daily mail volumes means posties often don't know what time they'll finish work each day.
Workers would go to work and not know whether they were going to be finished at 9.5 hours or even up to 11 hours. So it was quite physically demanding, but also it did disrupt people's family life. It was an example of a person who would go home after having worked up to 11 hours, no energy left to cook dinner, and then coming to work the next day tired.
John Maynard says posties had no choice in whether they worked overtime or not, and having to be available to do so had an impact on their personal lives. He says the postie who took the court case found that the requirement to be available for overtime affected his ability to join a community orchestra.
He wasn't sure if he could get to practices, and that spread right through workers in any sports. Could they get to the practices during the week? So the downsides were the long hours, the tiredness, but also the interruption to their family, domestic, social, cultural lives outside of work.
Business New Zealand's employment specialist Paul Mackay says the employment court's clarification of what employers must do when they need their staff to work overtime is a good thing. He says some businesses already have similar provisions in their contracts.
In many situations, we have things like standby allowances or call-out allowances where, in fact, people are being paid to be available, and it's an amount that they've agreed to pay. So there is precedent for these sorts of things in terms of payment.
In a statement, New Zealand Post says it works constructively with the unions representing its staff and will continue to do so in implementing the employment court's decision. The court has directed the union and New Zealand Post to start mediation to sort out the level of remuneration posties should be paid for making themselves available for overtime. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That's all we've got time for. Don't forget to check out our stories online. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll catch you again Monday.
RNZ News headline.